Hi, I'm Abby. I'm one of the instructors with the Brooklyn Kitchen, and today I'm going to show you how to make pretzels from your own home, from my parents' home in Rhode Island. So first things first, you want to make sure your hands are clean. If you touch your phone, you want to re-wash your hands. Your phones are disgusting. We all know where they've been. So now we're going to start talking about the ingredients to make the dough for the pretzels. So right here I have 5 to 6 cups of flour, a little bit of salt, about a tablespoon, a packet of yeast, a little sugar to make the yeast bloom, and then 2 cups of warm water. So for starters, we're going to dump the warm water into a large bowl, then the sugar, and then the yeast. So you're gonna take your hand and kind of swirl in the yeast and the sugar, take all the clumps out to make sure that everything's getting activated. And we're gonna leave this here for a few minutes to make sure it starts to bloom and gets a little foamy, which means that the yeast is working and your bread will rise. So I figured I'd introduce you to my kitchen assistant today. This is my parents' dog, Penny. Here she is. She is very comfortable in our kitchen. She's definitely a huge help. She'll be a bigger help when it's time to eat. Okay, so now that the yeast has started to activate, we're going to start by adding a cup of flour to the water and yeast mixture. And I'm gonna take my hand, only one hand because we need one hand free for doing things. Just gonna mix it in a little bit. Make sure it's like all incorporated. And then I'm gonna continue adding in flour. Slowly over time to make sure it all gets incorporated with the water and the yeast. So the reason why I said you might need 5 to 6 cups of flour is depending on the weather. Sometimes the dough is a little bit wet or dry, and wet, and then you'd need to add more flour. Dry, you could potentially add a little bit more water, but hopefully you won't have to do that. So just keep adding and mixing in. So you can see how it's starting to form what looks almost like, to me, a little bit like pancake batter. But once you continue adding in more flour over time, it'll get thicker and form a dough ball. And around this stage, we want to add in our salt. We wanted to give the yeast as much time to bloom as we could and to feast on this flour and the sugar. But now we need to add in the salt. So I'm going to continue to add flour until it becomes a smooth-ish dough ball. And I'll show you what I mean by smooth-ish in a couple minutes. Okay, so at this point, I've added in about 5 cups of flour. The dough is formed into a little bit of a shaggy ball, and we're gonna let it sit for a couple minutes to make our job of kneading a little easier, just to kind of start activating the gluten. So what I'm gonna do is what's called a baker's wash. I'm gonna take all of this dough off my hands in an easy way by literally just rubbing my hands together, taking a little flour, rubbing them together. Okay, so now that we've waited for our dough gluten to start forming a little bit more without having to put in any extra effort, we're going to start kneading. So we're gonna take a little bit of flour, sprinkle your surface, and then dump the contents of your dough ball from your bowl onto the surface and take all this stuff out because we're gonna put it back in the same bowl when it's done. We're gonna try to get as much out as possible. All right, so from here, we're gonna start kneading the dough. till it forms a nice smooth ball. It'll take a few minutes and a few tries, and if it gets a little sticky, you can add a little flour. This is a pretty forgiving dough, so don't worry about being too crazy with it. And if you over knead, you can just let it rest for a little bit and then go back. You just want to make sure you're always pushing in the same direction and then pulling back. So I'm going to keep going for a little bit. It's a really soft dough, so it's pretty easy to knead. Okay, so I'm pushing again with the heel of my hand, pulling it back, and just repeating that movement to build up that gluten structure to make our pretzels nice and chewy and delicious. So at this point, I'm gonna stop. The ball is pretty smooth. All right, so now that my dough ball is pretty smooth, I popped it in this bowl that I've coated with canola oil. And the canola oil is just so that it doesn't stick to the sides when it rises. So you can see our dough balls in here. There's some shiny canola oil. And then what we're going to do is we're gonna take this tea towel, place it over the top, and then take the whole bowl, place it somewhere warm for about an hour. And you wanna let the dough rise until it's reached about double in size from this point. So now that our dough has doubled in size, it's really fluffy, there's tons of air in it. So we're gonna take the dough out of the bowl and we're just gonna knead it a few times to kind of knock some of that air out and also incorporate some of this oil into it so it's not super slippery when we try to form our pretzels. Okay, so now we're going to separate this dough into even little pieces that we can then form into our pretzel knots. I'm using a chef's knife to cut the dough only because I forgot my bench scraper back in Brooklyn. But if you have a bench scraper at home, that will work totally fine. A butter knife will probably work fine. This dough is pretty soft. I just want to do it quickly, so I have this chef's knife to do it. So I'm gonna wipe the excess canola oil off my hands to make sure I don't have any mishaps with the chef knife. So then I'm just going to slice it in half here. You can kind of see how much air is in the dough. So you know your yeast worked, you know it's risen. So going from there, now I'm going to try to cut this into a few squares. I'm going to make medium-sized pretzels instead of mini ones or extra large, just because I find that they're easier to eat and share. So we're just eyeballing it because, you know, we're cooking in quarantine. Be as close to the same size as you can, but if it's not a big deal. You're cooking for you and your family or a roommate. You're not cooking for anyone else. Just trying to make even little plops of dough so that when we cook them, they're as even as possible. Okay, so now that we've sliced and diced our dough, we're going to start to form the pretzels. So what we want to do is take one of our dough sections, flatten it with the heel and palm of your hand, and then take from the outside and tuck and push it in with your fingertips, trying to be as even as possible. This increases the tension along the outside so that the pretzel will hold its round shape. Okay, so now that we've formed all of our cylinder logs of dough, we're going to start to roll them out to be a little bit longer. So we're going to work our way out from the center of the dough while rolling with the flat palm of our hand and trying to get it to be about shoulder width apart. So now that we're about there, we're going to take this dough make a little horseshoe. Take this, the ends, we're going to cross one over the other, and then we're going to do that again. And then we're going to bring that crossed end and tuck it up right like this to get a little pretzel. Look how cute he's looking. So then you're gonna take your formed pretzel and you're going to place it on a greased cookie sheet. Okay, so now that you've made an entire tray of your little pretzels, some of course are going to be prettier than others, but they'll all taste delicious. You're going to take a dishcloth and just cover them and leave them to rise and sit and relax for about 10 minutes. Now that your wonky little pretzels are done resting under your dishcloth, we have about 2 inches of water boiling on the stove, and we're going to add in 2 tablespoons of sugar as well as 1/4 cup of baking soda. And when you add in the baking soda, just be a little careful because it foams up pretty quickly. So we're just gonna add it and stir and keep doing that, just so that it doesn't explode all over your kitchen. And then we're gonna add the sugar and just stir it around. And then we're gonna reduce this to a simmer just so that it's not quite as crazy boiling while we're running our pretzels through the bath. And this is what makes the crust on the pretzel really thick. So now we're ready to start. Okay, so we're going to take a pretzel and we're going to drop it in carefully face down. And we're gonna let it simmer for about a minute, and then we're going to flip it and do it the same thing on the other side. So now it's about time to flip our pretzel, and you'll notice when I flip it that there's a little bit of color on the side that was in the water. So I just flipped it using a slotted spoon and a wooden spoon, and you can see that this side is now a little bit yellow. That's from the dough reacting with the bath that we put it in. So now we're going to take a slotted spoon and pick up our pretzel and just let the water drain and move it to a prepared cookie sheet that we have next to our pot here. It's just sprayed with a little bit of Pam to keep it from sticking once it's in the oven. So now I'm going to do an egg wash, and this is just 1 egg beaten with a tablespoon of water. So I'm going to take a pastry brush or like a basting brush that you probably have already in your kitchen and just lightly brush some of the egg on top. This is going to add shine and also allow our toppings to stick. Topping my pretzels, and I've created 3 different toppings for my savory pretzels. Since I'm going to be having these with a cocktail, I'm going to want something that's a little more savory, but if you're interested in having these as more of a dessert treat or a snack during the day, feel free to add cinnamon and sugar, but these ones, I'm gonna go for savory. So I made a Parmesan, garlic, and Italian seasoning mix, just one that has coarse sea salt in it, and then one that's just an everything bagel salt that I had in my kitchen already. So I'm gonna go ahead and take some of this with my fingers, sprinkle it on liberally, because who doesn't love cheese? Then I'll take some sea salt, sprinkle it on here, not too much because it can get a little too salty. And then we're gonna take some everything bagel seasoning and sprinkle that on as well. So now we're ready for this to go into the oven. I've preheated our oven to 450 degrees. We're just gonna pop these in for about 10-15 minutes or until the internal temperature is 200 degrees. So my parents are going to have a Zoom cocktail party tonight with some of their friends. So I'm going to set them up with 3 different kinds of mustards as dipping sauces for their pretzels. So I'm going to be using a honey mustard, a coarse ground Dijon mustard, as well as mustard from Oscar Smokehouse, which is a small smokehouse up in the Adirondacks, which my family has a cabin up there and we love this smokehouse. So I'm going to be placing them all on little plates that I designed in my other job as one of the designers for Fishezetti. They're a small, locally owned business in New York City, so go buy their stuff online. So I'm just going to spoon some of this mustard out onto the plates. They'll just need a little bit because they're gonna have, try each sauce. We are, after all, using the portion control plate, so you gotta make sure your portions are correct. This one's a little stickier, so just gotta let it do its thing. Because it's honey, and it was in the fridge. All right, so now I have these cute little spoons that they can use to spread the mustard. Now we're just waiting for the pretzels to be done. So now I'm checking that the internal temperature of the pretzels is up to 200, and it is. All right, I'm gonna take this out to my parents who are just about to start their Zoom cocktail party. Thanks so much for watching. I hope your pretzels turn out fabulous, and I hope that you follow along with Brooklyn Kitchen as we produce more quarantine content for you.